This is a recording of Beyond the Surface, Understanding Synthetic Turf and its Environmental Impact. This event was held on the 31st of August, which was a Sunday at Manly Cove, and then there was a panel event and presentation in Manly Art Gallery and Museum. This is presented by Dr. Scott Wilson from AUSMAP, Arabella Condon from Seabin Foundation, and Colin Finn from Blue Green. We would like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as Australia's first people and the local traditional owners as the original custodians of the land and water. So first, this presentation on synthetic turf will be led by myself, and then Dr. Scott Wilson will go into the chemicals and really dive deep into the understanding of what synthetic turf is. Then Colin Finn will go into why this is happening and how we are treating the symptom, not the disease, and why this problem has been occurring. After this presentation, a panel event was hosted by Dr. Scott. This panel held Bonnie Harvey, Ben Perry, Colin Finn, and James Hayes. AUSMAP, Australian Microplastic Assessment Project, is a nationwide citizen science program mapping microplastic pollution across Australia. By combining community action with scientific research, AUSMAP provides critical data to drive policy change, raise awareness, and support solutions that reduce plastic pollution in our waterways and coastal environments. Blue Green is a nature-positive focused social enterprise which explores nature-based climate solutions, concept designs, urban parks, and builds the business and social cases for change. They believe urban foreshore parks are our best chance to mitigate the impacts of climate change while making our cities healthier, greener, and more connected. And then we have Seabin Foundation, led by Mahi, who's here today, which uses data collected from sea bins to turn off the tap to marine plastic pollution. By creating litter prevention campaigns, it aims to highlight plastic pollution problems to drive policy change, as well as having free educational programs, and runs free daily tours at our lab, which is actually just at the Australian Maritime Museum. So if you guys are ever over there, please feel free to come in and say hi. All right, now for a bit of a backstory. So synthetic turf was created in the early 1960s, and it was actually created to replace concrete in urban areas. And then its design was taken into indoor arenas that lacked sunlight, so it was thought as a great solution to replace natural grass. Now we can see synthetic turf in all different sorts of circumstances, from schools to your neighbour's yard, to kids' playgrounds, sports fields and venues. Some venues even use it almost as an outdoor rug and put seating and stuff over the top of it. It's one of those problems that when you notice it, you really can't unsee it as well. So why has it been so popular? Australia goes through big periods of drought and rainfall, as we saw in the past few weeks. So in these periods of drought, a lot of schools changed their natural turf fields to synthetic, and it was seen as an environmentally friendly option so that we didn't have to use a lot of water. And then sports fields also don't get muddy with all-weather fields, so it was seen as a solution to help kids be able to play sport for longer. As well as in high foot traffic areas, it was used to have less maintenance in these areas. All right, so then if this seems also good, why are we even here? So this is a sea bin, as you guys can see. So they're floating and attached to docks. They run by a pump and they sit in there 24/7 collecting plastic pollution, and then we will take it to our lab and sort through all of those different plastic items. And we actually noticed in 2024, when we went from having wet catches to dry catches, that synthetic turf was even a problem. Before 2024, when the catches were wet, because it looked so much like grass, we didn't even know that that was a problem. So in this period of 2024, there was 20 to 32 sea bins, and they collected an estimated 32,000 synthetic grass blades.
And as you can imagine, 20 to 32 Seabins all around Sydney Harbour is actually not that much space when you think about it. So these almost act as data points, and we can just imagine the amount of synthetic turf blades that is so widely spread all the way from Manly to Rose Bay. It was even the 6th most common item in Seabins in 2024. So that's really why we're here, and I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Scott Wilson.
Thank you. Thanks, Bella, for that lovely introduction. What I want to do is do a deep dive into synthetic fields a bit more so you understand what the problem is and why we're concerned. So when we do a cross-section through a field, it's not just grass. There's a whole range of other things in there. And so obviously the grass blades are plastic, so mostly polyethylene or polypropylene. But when we have a look, and there's been different generations of grass fields, synthetic grass fields, and as Bella showed from those early 1960s, that's generation 1. We're up to mostly generation G3, but there's these new G4 models coming onto the market now. But most of what you see out there in terms of sports fields are 3rd generation fields. So what that means is they not only have the grass blades, they'll have quite often a shock pad underneath, which is rubber. There's often polyurethane backing, so plastic on plastic. Then there might be some sand just to weigh it down. But then, and if anyone's been on the sports fields with rubber crumb, they have an infill, like an artificial soil. And this is to keep the blades upright, so it has a natural rollability of the balls, so it acts like a normal sports field. So most of in New South Wales, most of the fields have rubber crumb. This rubber crumb, I'll talk about in a minute, but is basically shredded old tyres. And it was seen to be a nice way of recycling, end-of-life tyres, but I'll show you some of the issues with that. So this is what it looks like, all right? This is what we're dealing with. I mentioned rubber crumb. Rubber crumb is, as I said, shredded tyres. So in Australia, there's about 80,000 tonnes of end-of-life tyres each year. So we've got a lot of waste of tyres. Most of that gets either exported out of the country, and what comes back is these shredded tyres. So all the infill for the sports field is actually imported rather than created here. But with the rubber these days, if you didn't know, is not pure natural rubber. It's a synthetic blended rubber, so styrene butadiene rubber, so like polystyrene, so it's the same chemical. But there's a whole range of other chemicals and nasties associated with that rubber. And this is the big cause for concern. So there's volatile organic compounds, and James, you'll hear from James later in the panel session about what they're finding in that area. There's fillers, things like carbon black. There's metals, zinc and copper and lead, etc. PAHs, antioxidants and fillers and things like that. So there's thousands of chemicals in one little particle, and they leach off the field. So the particles come off the field, but also the chemicals in those come off the field, and that's what we're finding in our waterways as well. So apart from the chemical issues, and obviously the particles coming off, the particles are considered microplastics because they're less than 5 millimetres. There's a whole range of other issues there that you probably all heard about. You hear because you either want to know or you have heard about the issues. Temperature being one. These are heat sinks. They basically raise the temperature above that of the ambient air temperature. Temperatures above 80 degrees have been recorded above the surface of some fields in summer when the air temperature might be about 30. So they're unplayable surfaces at those times. So they're not all weather fields, really, are they? And of course, that leads to this urban heat island effect even more. Obviously, our cities generate a lot of heat, absorb a lot of heat from the sun and generate a lot of heat from that. So the fields themselves are contributing to this heat island effects. The estimated lifespan of these fields, they say, is between 8 and 12 years. Realistically, in our climate, so remember these are used all over the world, and the companies say, oh, you can get up to 12 years from it, but in realistic terms, from an Australian point of view, condition point of view, 8 years best, I reckon. There's also concerns that with flooding of these areas, if poor drainage. So sometimes the drainage is not well managed, and so that can create localised flooding as well. Microplastics I mentioned, we're seeing on average about 100 kilos of the grass blades coming off per field per year, and over 500 kilos of that infill, which, as I said, is mostly rubber crumb per field per year. So this is all microplastic, and as Bella mentioned, what they're finding in the sea bins is also kind of what we're finding in our AUSMAP samples that I'll talk about. They're also quite costly to install, over $1 million and going up. And even though they're considered low maintenance, there is still a need for maintenance on it. So you can't just set and leave. The other big issue is what happens to them at the end of life. They're really a mixture of products, as I showed you with that slide. So they're not simple to deal with. They're a mixed commodity. While there is a facility now open in Victoria that does recycle them, there's still a lot that end up in waste. So basically they're getting dumped at the moment. So lots of issues. Of course, there's people out there say they're a great surface and they're better than our original turf. Remember that, grass? Grass has obviously lots of benefits, so they still promote biodiversity. So obviously, the soil biota and the bird life can still use that. There's a natural filtration there, of course. There's one important thing that you don't hear a lot is carbon sequestration. By removing these fields and putting in synthetic turf, we're actually removing a source for the carbon to come out of the air and into the soil. These fields do that naturally. Obviously, people, there's social benefits of having a natural turf to a synthetic field, and obviously the cooling effects are a lot less, or the heating effects are a lot less. Of course, you hear people say that it's on the bad side of having grass fields is that, they require a lot of maintenance. You've got to water them, you've got to mow them, you've got to add fertiliser. And when you look at the maintenance requirements for grass compared to synthetic, they're about the same in terms of costs and time. So, as I was saying before, there's maintenance for both, but they're not as high for these types of fields. Water use is one, and that's admittedly, but if a grass field is well designed, well built, and you have a trickle irrigation system, you can limit the water usage on it. The big one that they're sold is the idea that grass fields, you have less playtime, so compared to a synthetic field. So once again, if the field is built right, so you've got the right soil, the right grass, and everything's designed right and has great drainage, you're getting about similar playtimes to a synthetic sports field. Classic example is at Middlehead, just down the road at Mossman. That's getting 40 plus hours per week of playtime, and it's still a usable field because it has been designed appropriately. So, you spend the money and you'll get the right thing. Some say these fields need, have a shorter life, and you use a lot of fertilisers. But in reality, when you look it up, they're about similar lifespans, and the fertiliser use is minimised because it's captured. You don't lose it. So, if we draw it back to synthetic turf fields, then yes, might look green, but is it really green? We know the plastics are highly mobile, whether it be the infill or the blades themselves, and we're seeing hundreds of kilos coming off each year. This is some data that we've collected over the years for AUSMAP on synthetic grass. So the map on the right is of Sydney. The colours, all the points represent areas where we've found synthetic grass along our shorelines. Okay? The coloured points represent the amounts of the blades per square metre. Okay, so the greens are low, so about less than 10 blades per square metre. So everything we measure in AUSMAP is a per metre measure. And you can multiply that across a shoreline and kind of work out levels. But what I'll point to is areas around here in Manly, on the other side in Rose Bay, and then you can see a big black point in Botany Bay there. That's near the mouth of the Cooks River. That has, that last sample, which was earlier this year, had over 1,000 blades per square metre. So that is huge amounts of plastic blades are coming off in that particular sample. And the graph on the left is showing you two sites, the Manly Cove site, so literally just here, and we've been sampling there since 2018, but what we're seeing in the blue bars is the amount of microplastics per square metre, and you can see that basically from 2022 we've seen an increase in the microplastic blades. The red bar is Rose Bay on the other side of the harbour, and we're seeing a distinct increase, even though you might not think 30 or 50 per square metre is not much, but as I was saying, this accumulates and can obviously cause harm. So the data is showing that it's everywhere and it's increasing. We did a study last couple of years where we looked at what was coming off a certain sports field. And we did that by measuring, we put baskets in the drains around the field, we put nets in creeks downstream of the field, and we measured what people walked off the field to try and quantify what's coming off these fields. And so what we're finding, and this photo here is a classic example of it, this is the amount of blades, you can see there's blades and rubber crumb on this particular sports field. That the basket that has 200 microns, so 0.2 of a millimetre, is capturing this is after a rain event, so between 150 or 300 grams. So it's not much in weight after a rain event, but we're getting crumb particles up to 76 individual pieces and synthetic grass up to 50-odd thousand pieces. So while it's not weighty, the particle numbers are huge and they're of concern. The study also found, so this is in the baskets in the drains around the field, so it had drains, but what we found by looking at the nets in the creek downstream of the field, we were still finding crumb, we were still finding grass downstream. So they were bypassing through people walking it off, it kind of bypassing the drain system. So and as our results showed, and Bella's results showed from the sea bins, it's getting in our waterways, even if you've got measures like these baskets in place. But it does change from site to site, and so what factors influence this loss? The amount of heat that field gets. The higher the temperatures, the more brittle the grass becomes, and it's more readily going to break apart. Obviously, the rainfall is going to wash the material off. The amount of play time is also important. So the more play you have, the more likely the blades will break and the crumb will come off. And that gets back to the yarn or the blade type and the weave, how it was kind of knitted in there, and the type of infill, of course. Obviously, the amount of mitigation measures you have in place, and this photo here is a classic example. So there's a spoon drain going around that whole field, and you can see there's the drain there. So a gutter system and drain. It's supposed to capture all the water and any particles, but if you can see all those black patches on the grass, that is all rubber crumb. That has kind of bypassed that system. So, mitigation measures definitely help, but it doesn't stop all of it coming off. What we found, interestingly, if a field has more shade, like natural tree cover over part of the field, not necessarily the whole field, it protects it. It makes sense, right? So you're stopping the UV light breaking the field down. And so more shade, more cover, your field's going to last longer and you're going to have less microplastic coming off. And of course the age of it, as it ages, it's going to become release more plastics. So one of the last things I'll finish up on before I hand on to Colin is what happens to these fields at end of life. As I said, there's not much recycling of it. In New South Wales, we estimate over the next 5 years, there'll be about 12,000 tonnes of the synthetic turf and the infill that will need to be managed at its end of life. So at the moment, one facility is not at capacity and dealing with the whole country. So most of it is, as I said before, going to landfill. And of course, in New South Wales, we have a circular infrastructure plan and a waste plan that's supposed to stop needless dumping of waste. And so this kind of action is really going against that plan. So I'll leave it there and pass it on to Colin to tell you a bit about the symptoms.
All right, I'm going to take this in a completely different direction, because one of the things I've found is I've been looking at urban foreshore Australia, and most of our sports fields are here, because this is the area of the city that we filled in last. We built on the highlands, where the water was, we filled in, and that became our playgrounds. Those became our Jubilee parks. Those areas are now very, very flooding prone. And often when you hear about we don't get enough days of play, they don't get enough days of play because the sports fields are washed out. We're literally treating the symptom, not the disease. And the disease is we put our parks in the wrong places. We put our parks where there used to be wetlands, where there used to be swamps. I've been deep diving into Rushcutters Bay, and I deep dove into Iron Cove Bay. Every sports field in those two very large precincts of our city are where would have been about 4 to 5 meters out into the ocean. We've filled, and over the last 130 years, those parks have begun to sink down. And this is a really significant problem, because we are going to, in the next few years, lose all of that parkland. We've already had a 1/4 meter of sea level rise. We're systematically getting additional 1/4 meters when we get these heat bubbles coming off the Coral Sea. We already have another meter baked into the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. even if we go to net zero tomorrow, we will get a meter of sea level rise. That is now inevitable. How quickly it happens, that's the question. And we're already seeing significant parts of our city suffering consistent inundation events. That's the domain you can see there. And the domain used to flood once a generation. Then it used to flood once a decade. Now it floods every single high tide. And I'm going to talk about two different sports fields. This is in the inner west. This is in Iron Cove. One of the sports field on the right is in Callan Park, and that's managed by the Sydney Parkland Authority. The park on the left is in the inner west and managed by the Inner West Council. Those two groups have taken profoundly different approaches to managing these two. The Parkland Authority, who has a long-term approach, they're raising up the park, up 2 meters, up out of the risk zone, and putting constructed wetlands on each side, those big drainage ditches. From a nature positive perspective, where I come from, that's brilliant, because that's home for amphibians, that's home for animals. Kids can look down and, enjoy nature. And that playground's going to be there in 100 years, and it's going to be dry. You're going to get the full days of play on it because it will drain properly. The next playground over is getting synthetic turfed. It will be fairly consistently inundated inside the next 5 to 10 years. And the problem is, once they get inundated, they get destroyed. They are all weather, sure. They do not take well to being overwhelmed by seawater. As lots of councils in Brisbane and Queensland are discovering, and now in the North Coast, and now in Taree, that consistent heavy flooding, that inundation, it's coming for us next. And the chance that that playground in the inner west will make it 8 years is statistically extremely remote. And the problem we face then is two concepts, which is path dependency. The more you do something, the better you get at it. If we get really good at doing synthetic turf, we will keep doing synthetic turf. There's also lock-in. Once that field in the inner west goes synthetic, when it's destroyed, it will be replaced by another synthetic turf. And then it will be destroyed again and will be replaced again. It is all of these wetland, all of these low-lying playgrounds are no longer insurable. Every time that happens, the council will be out $2 million. This is starting to look like a very financially irrational decision for a couple more days of play. And I'm saying we can do better. We can just don't choose this. We can learn to live with the climate change that's coming. We can make our playgrounds and our sports fields and our parks ready to flood. We have the global technology, and we can make them fun places. We can learn to play with water. We've got local examples like Sydney Park. Sydney Park is a brilliant climate-resistant park, and it's a great place for children to play. Or we can use water to make play spaces that protect us and our homes from flooding. There's projects this is in Copenhagen, where they've actually lowered the ground to make hockey pitches. And these are their areas of the city that are first to flood. So if they get a major flood event, sure, these fill up and they become lakes, but they don't lose houses, they don't lose main streets, they don't lose businesses. And then they're designed to drain off and dry out. Or we can elevate our parks and put stormwater capture and retention underneath them, like this project in Boston, where they're lifting up the whole park. They're building great natural systems like swales and bioretention basins. And that both drought-proofs and flood-proofs your park, because it gives you these giant water tanks through your city. So you get a cloudburst event, you get a sudden high rain event. There's somewhere we can put the water that's not in your living room. And then the drought, we're going to get a mega drought. And if we have every sports field is a couple 100 gigaliters of water, that will protect us. And we can use these as great places to play. We can learn and reconnect to country. This is Gosford's Leagues. It's an incredible project on the North Coast where they've got a series of surrounding sports fields that all drain down into this wetland play space. that's been designed by some of our First Nations partners who are just amazing. It's just a fun, I mean, it won 20 International Design Awards, but it's a great place. We don't need to cheat and use synthetic turf. That's my end of my urbanist speech. Now I'm just going to have an opinion piece. This is not my opinion. I am not stating legal. I have no legal basis for these claims. This is my opinion. But there's a consistent trend here of how chemicals that persist in our environment proceed through their life cycle. When I was a kid, I remember being told not to lick the walls. It's a dumb thing, but we were told don't chew on the crib, don't lick the walls. And at the same time, our parents were being told that the people who are trying to ban paint are trying to steal childhood. They're trying to take color out of our lives. They were also told there's no viable alternative to lead paint. We have to live with lead paint. And then the bans start to kick in, and the bans start to spread to the EU, and eventually Australia gets around to the ban. We saw the same trend with DDT. We saw the same trend with asbestos. Australia's got this really strange habit of accelerating before the ban. It's because fundamentally we're a dumping market. We're seeing it with internal combustion cars now. While most countries are shifting away from them, people are dumping their old internal combustion cars on us. We saw it, we were a laggard in crystal silica, you know, the counters that give you lung disease. We're starting to see the same things emerge with rubber crumb and with PFAS, where you're seeing states like California and New Jersey banning them outright. You're seeing the European Union begin cautions on them. And Australia is kind of thinking maybe we should start to talk about them. And I'm segueing to you.
Thanks, Colin, for that. And yeah, I think there's some positive notes that we can take from what Colin mentioned, and we can also look at what's happening locally as well. So while there's cause for concern, we can see changes happening. Yes, it's slow, but hey, it's happening. So as you're probably aware, there was a chief scientist report that talked about synthetic turf in public spaces a few years ago that raised concerns that there wasn't enough information or data about the impacts of these fields. More recently, there's been a planning guideline for managing synthetic turf fields. So while both of those documents have gaps and holes, they're a step in the right direction. It means the government is starting to do something. And more recently, in New South Wales, there's a product life cycle Responsibility Act. So this only came into being this year. And what this means is, and it states it quite clearly in the objective, if a company or producer creates a product and it either harms the environment or humans, it needs to clean it up. So I think this Act could be a great avenue for some action. I know New South Wales Greens are definitely looking at this for microplastics, so watch this space. We're seeing with EU restrictions and other parts of the world removing rubber crumb as an infill. We're seeing now definitely the businesses that promote synthetic sports fields, this new generation of synthetic sports fields won't have rubber crumb in them. Yes, they're still there in probably 70 to 80% of the fields we have, but they're going to alternative infill products. So things like cork is being used, brock fill, which is wood chip, walnut shells, these natural alternatives. But there's some new fields which are going to be zero infill, and it's just grass blades. So it doesn't get around the issue of the grass loss, but it gets around some of the issues of toxicity with the infill. So I think that's a positive, but as I said, there's still more to do. So we just wanted to finish on that note and say that you guys being here today can all please be a part of the action. Hopefully this has helped you to maybe do something. And we've created, if you scan that QR code, we've created a template letter. We've written it for you, and you can please send it to your local member or councillors and try and get some action on this. So we do have a hard copy here if anyone wants to use that. But what we're really asking you is to take action. Let's promote what can be done, that we need more action on this actually. All right, enough of that. Now it's time for, and Taylor's going around with the QR code if anyone missed that. We've got our panel session now, so just hold your questions for the moment. We'll do all the questions after we get the panellists up, and you can quiz them to your heart's content. So I'm going to call up the panellists as they're on the board there. First up, we already heard from Colin, so Colin, you're needed. No worries. So Colin, as we heard, is the founder of thank you, Blue Green Australia. I'll just give you his bio. He's an urban futurist looking at the intersection of design, climate change and the creation of great places for people. And he's also doing his PhD in urban ecology, so that's great, where he's looking at drawing together Indigenous knowledge, historical cartography and modern data to identify nature-based solutions. So welcome to the panel, Colin. Our second panellist is Bonnie Harvey. Bonnie? Thank you.
I didn't know you were going to read it out in front of everyone.
Oh, sorry. Sure. Well, Bonnie's part of the Northern Beaches Council. She's the youngest woman ever elected to the council and is a representative of the Manly ward right here locally. She's a keen... there you go. And she's a keen environmentalist and student of socio-legal studies. So welcome, Bonnie. Our third panellist is Dr. James Hayes. James is a research fellow at UNSW. Welcome up onto the stage. UNSW Water Research Centre and Air Quality and Odour Laboratory. So James not only did an undergraduate in psychology, but a PhD in civil and environmental engineering. So it's interesting to combine those two in your works. And he's just authored a paper where he reviewed some data regarding synthetic turf and malodors. So we'll probably hear about that. So welcome, James. And our final panellist is Ben Perry. Welcome, Ben. Ben is the co-founder of Future Village and a leader in green infrastructure innovation with a focus on creating healthier, more resilient cities. He has delivered projects that integrate natural systems into dense urban environments. So, welcome all, and I've got a few... people, when they signed up, submitted some questions. So I've got some questions that I'll start off asking the panellists, and then we'll open it up for any from the audience. So, I need my glasses, sorry. All right, so I'm going to start with James. So your research was one of the first to look at synthetic turf and odour. So can you tell me what you found and what it kind of means in terms of people's experience and impacts?
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, no one's really looked at this, which we found a little bit interesting. We conducted a literature review to have a look at like what kind of odours could be present within all the different components of synthetic turf. Just very, very recently, in fact 2 weeks ago, we actually finally did some proper experiments to determine exactly what the concentrations were, thanks to Ruth Fisher and Kao-Chang Liu over at the lab. We found a few dominant odours, odorants, volatile organic compounds. We're looking at tridecane, that's a big one, styrene, xylene, and one that I'd never come across before, benzene 3-cyclohexane. Now, all these things don't mean anything hardly to me. I can't imagine it meaning anything to anyone else. However, the vast majority of these odours have a rubbery smell, an oily smell, and interestingly, a floral smell, and that's probably like little bits and pieces of adhesive. And now, typically my research focuses on malodor in environments and how that impacts people. And typically, you know, you might have like an odor-causing site that might be a couple of kilometers away from a local community. The local community gets upset. Synthetic turf is unique, as far as I'm aware, in that the odor-causing issue is right within communities. They're right up next to your door. They're things that are very close around. And that can cause some interesting effects, again, which haven't been studied. The first one is that there will be a small proportion of any population where those particular chemicals will invoke essentially what I would call a bit of an allergic reaction, people with certain chemical sensitivities, and those ones certainly are capable of doing that. The second thing we found is that as you increase the temperature on synthetic turf, those volatile organic compounds shoot up. Obviously, you know, the more heat, the more activity, the more the odour comes out. It's very, very well pronounced, and you'll find that as summer heat increases, those odours become quite strong. Now, again, the capacity for that to interact with people who live close to these synthetic turf sites, not being able to control your environment from an odour perspective isn't necessarily something which is all that good, for want of a better word. And I suppose the other thing is that, you know, after a synthetic turf field, and I get a lot of anecdotal discussion about this, you kind of come off and you've got some of that rubber stuff and that kind of thing. And that can cause people to have an association with synthetic turf, and perhaps even sport to a certain extent, that something's wrong about it. Your sense of smell is alerting you to something that you're concerned about. So again, all this is speculation. I can just make comments within the odour space, as it were, because very little research has happened. But yeah, that can absolutely happen, and it can have an impact on a community's local environment.
So you haven't looked at the community responses?
We haven't done that yet, no. This research is very, very recent, so Kao-Chang literally had some results 2 weeks ago, and before that it was a literature review and some reports we did for New South Wales. It would be a very interesting thing to look at. I suspect a lot of people might not even notice the odour at times, but in certain circumstances, and especially within varying environments, we have no idea what the interaction between those chemicals in synthetic turf and, say, if there's local eucalyptus or different funny interactions and they degrade at a weird point and they cause something else. We just don't know. So a huge scope of research. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So just kind of following on then, because Bonnie, you're obviously representing the local community in your electorate. So what do you think communities can do to most effectively influence council in decision making as regards turf or advocate for alternatives?
Thank you, and thank you all for coming down and wanting to learn more and engage with scientists. I feel so honoured to be up here among such highly esteemed and knowledgeable people. And I think that's where it really begins. I saw so many people getting out their phone and taking pictures and the little twittering of the 6th most common thing in Manly. Like, it is shocking, you know, and it is alarming. And it seems to me to be just another example of something that's become common knowledge that really shouldn't be. It is reminiscent to me of what we now know to be, you know, a sort of false sense of security or science around shark nets, you know, something else that we know greatly harms our environment and has this sort of placebo comfort to the community. So I think, you know, step one is always education and getting the message out there. But obviously, it's going to be a lot more effective if we can do that in a way that's going to have an impact on our governments. Because right now, our council area isn't as bad as others. We have 121 sports fields, 7 of them are synthetic turf, but there are other sites being investigated for more turf to go in. And we've seen across New South Wales state area in the last 5 years, the rate of these sites going in has gone up six times over. So we're having 6 times as many turf fields going in. And even the new Frenchs Forest High School, that's got a huge synthetic turf field going in. So does that tell you that from the Department of Education, their standard new best practice is synthetic turf? I think it should. The byline that we've been told, because we had a briefing on this just last Tuesday from Council, is that our preference, and this is operational, the preference is natural turf, but the most important thing is playing hours. And the last time I've had to vote on this once since I got elected, and it was to approve a plan of management at Rat Park, and some of myself and other councillors tried to vote against it because it had synthetic turf and to amend it, but you know, synthetic turf it is there, so synthetic turf it will continue to be. But we asked, can you at least come back to us with a briefing, and so we can compare these things. And unfortunately, what I see in our council is that they're comparing the turf fields that we already have with the performance of synthetics. So to them, it looks, you know, not cost effective, we're not getting as many hours, and similar to what you were saying, you know, we're just not dreaming big enough. So I think it really does take the community to come together and say, hey, natural turf is actually best practice. And I think it's really, really important for us to get, you know, I'm assuming that a lot of people here are environmentally focused, but we need the sports communities to come with us, because it's been pitched in this way politically, which unfortunately it often is, you know, the greenies or the environmentalists against fun, good old-fashioned fun. But, you know, for sports players, they just want to play their sport. I can understand that. But natural turf is best practice. And if you look at the recommendations for the chief scientists that came out of New South Wales recently, they said, you know, if you're going to have this, it actually should be covered in shade. So no matter what we do, we're not going to have best practice synthetic turf, so we should be fighting together as a community for best practice natural turf and upgrading our current fields that we have to best practice natural turf. Synthetic turf is an answer to a false problem, you know? So I think we really need to spread the messages, spread the photos that you've taken, tell your friend, hey, do you want to come get coffee and talk about synthetic turf? They'll love it, trust me. They love it when you try and teach them. But, you know, we need to reach out across community groups, because that's when a movement is strong, and say to the, you know, community sporting teams, hey, you deserve really good playing fields, and instead of wasting another $2.5 million on a synthetic turf field, which is also not very, anyway, we need to come together and petition council for best practice natural turf. Now, that looks like emailing councillors, that looks like paying very close attention to people like myself and Councillor Miranda Causey, who are planning to build more and more of a community movement on this, bringing forward a petition, eventually bringing forward hopefully a moratorium or some sort of motion to council on this. If we fill those council chambers, if we get educated speakers to come and speak to council, the beautiful thing about the politics that we have here on the Northern Beaches is people love community representation, and I think that's fantastic. You know, we think outside the box and we're educated, so if we come and we say very, very clearly, hey, this is what all across the community we want, then the politics listen, the staff do what we say, they might not like it, but they have to, and we have change. And then state government and federal government can say our community has wanted this at a local level and take the baton forward. Sorry, very long-winded, but thank you.
Well said. So, it kind of draws in Ben, I think, because Ben, you've been working in green spaces and cooling spaces. How can those ideas be scaled up and still include kind of playing surfaces?
Oh, thank you all. I know Sunday's a hard day to come out, but it's great to see so many people interested in this topic. Our area of specialty is looking at ways to be alternate to synthetic fields. And there's two areas which we have been investigating. We have a partner group called Water Ups. They're another Australian company. And one of the big areas which Colin mentioned is actually drainage in fields, like how to get fields to drainage. And one of the areas we really work very closely in is wicking. It's a very old technology, but it hasn't been commercialised in a sense. And that is, you create a reservoir and you have a sock or a wick that takes the water out of that reservoir into the soil profile that plants can then access. The benefit of this is you're not top rotting, and you can also store water. So in a detention sense or retention side of heavy water, you can actually create these reservoir systems that hold water and then can feed up into the turf area above it. And we've been doing quite a bit of research over the last year just in our sheds on the possibility of this and looking at what this does for root growth, because one of the biggest problems in sporting fields, which is the next area, is wear and tear. So normal playing fields, they don't wear and tear evenly. If you play football, I actually play for Mossman Football Club, so I play all up and down the seaboard here. The most wear and tear is going to be around the goal mouths, often in the centre where the cricket pitches are, or the exit and entrance ways where all the public and everyone's walking all the time. The rest of the fields, down the wings, is all pretty much going to be okay. So the next area we're looking at is how can we create a possibility of bringing in and having a modular system that can actually come in and go out of those worn areas. And there's some quite interesting people looking at this. There's a turf growing group out in Windsor that's actually hydroponically growing turf and putting a jute backing on it, so you can actually come in and cut the entire turf lay off and drop in fully grown turf back into that space, so it doesn't need to take. Very expensive at the moment because it is growing it on a hydroponic surface. My business partner invented the drop-in wicket pitches, which I don't know if any know, the MCG, the SCG, this whole idea of you take the entire cricket pitch out and put it back in. We can't sell it anymore because it's so expensive that no one can afford to put that into unless you're the MCG. So how do we make this a modular system that's a lot smaller, that the council just maintenance teams can use and pick it up just with their tractors and replace in and out? So we're looking at the possibility of putting this detention systems, these modulated systems that can then sit into goal mouths as well as into the cricket pitches. So that's some of the areas we're looking at. Unfortunately, there's no alternate that can just go switched in straight away against synthetic. There's a whole lot of variables that come down. Each of them all contain plastic of some sort. Even our tray system, they have to get formed in plastic to make them. You then have different types of turf. You've got hybrid turf, which some of you may have heard of, which is a mixture of synthetic and actually seeding in there. Then you've also got a mesh structure you can put into grass, into the soil structure to hold the turf together more. But you can't get this stuff out. Like, it's really, really hard to recycle. So there's a whole lot of people looking at this in different areas, and hopefully we're just one of the small ideas that can come in that can possibly make an impact, which is how do we keep the sports fields alive for longer, how do we keep them more usable for longer, and how do we prevent the need to look at synthetic as the only other option.
It's great to hear that, you know, the new novel ideas that are being brought to bear. So I'm going to, we heard from Colin earlier, and you obviously deal with kind of multi-functional spaces. In terms of sporting playfields, how can we kind of resist the, you know, the urge to put in a synthetic sports field in this kind of multi-purpose space?
I think the key word there is multi-purpose. It's about using everything in our urban parks for more than one thing. We get really myopically stuck on it's a sports field, it needs to be a sports field 365 days a year. Every square inch of it needs to get replaced every X. We can do lots of different things. We can have more sports fields and rotate. We could just say that, I think Ben and I have talked a lot about resting. We used to rest our fields. If we get our drainage properly done, like Manly's pitch is great for that. They rest it properly. We just don't need to push our fields 110%. Why don't we start to think about other uses of those fields? Why don't we think about farmers markets and community events? Why don't we think about, you know, fields that also are bounded by big natural areas that become play areas for informal sports? It's about spreading out the wear. It's about we have to think, especially in the age of climate change, where we have to adapt our spaces. We have to think about everything has to do at least 3 things. We can't be that this is a rugby pitch that only does rugby. And I also, that's my point of multifunction. I did want to jump on aroma, by the way. Back in my world, there's a lot of evidence about the positive odors of nature. And my dad, I grew up around my dad who played rugby all the time, and I remember the smell of mud and grass. And that's a very positive memory. I think that we're replacing that with a petroleum smell. That's not great.
All right, thank you. So just a few thank yous before you head off. So you might have seen the lovely artworks around here and around the gallery. Joyce is here. There, thank you, Joyce, for these lovely works. Who's the Seabin artist in residence. So we thank her. Thank, obviously, the Manly Art Gallery for hosting us here today. Our felons for the beverages that you're enjoying. And we've got also Natural Turf Alliance have a brochure which you may have seen. You can also get the details there. And thank you all really for attending today. Hopefully you've learnt something. And just once again, if you want to send a letter to your local MP, there's the QR code, and obviously any donations, because we're both Seabins and AUSMAP are not-for-profit organisations. So thank you again. Enjoy any drinks or food are left, and hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you.